All right, all right. Well, you know what? I just got back from PHP Tech just 4 months ago, which was I think what we were talking about before our last show, episode 80. By the way, last show was episode 80. This is episode 81, and it's titled "A Little Break." So we took a little, just a short break, right, Mark?
Just a small one.
Yeah, yeah. And now
Everyone needs a break once in a while.
yeah. So, but we're back. We're back. We're back. And I think the last time we talked, I was trying to get you to put a bunch of tiny classified ads in search for your next job. But last I don't know that we ever talked about it on the podcast, but you've started a new gig.
I did, Tim. I have become a professional developer. I love how we talk about professional development in the show. And as I used to be an academic and used to fantasize and dream about becoming a real developer, well, Tim, I'm a real developer now.
You're a real developer now, huh?
Or back to doing that, back to the industry. Left academia, found a full-time job, and doing a lot of microservices architecture development on AWS. Yes, so it's been interesting.
Can you talk about much of that?
I can talk about the company I'm working for, especially if you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll definitely know who I'm working for and what I'm doing.
Okay.
But I did talk to my boss about the fact of like, yeah, we're cool about you doing a podcast, but just be careful what you talk about here because we do have sign some disclosures here. Don't want you to talk about what you're doing day to day.
I love this because
be a
now
little bit careful about.
The roles are reversed because like for the past couple of years, you tried to get me to talk about things I can't talk about, and now I get to do the same to you. That said.
Yeah.
That said, been playing around with Glue a little bit.
Oh, really?
And step files and things, and maybe we'll walk through a little bit of that because I've got some questions.
All right. Well, I've over the past few months, I've been spending a lot of time with Glue and with the different data pipelines. So absolutely,
yeah,
to talk about that.
The other thing that I just noticed, because we were away for 4 months, right, or whatever that would be. What was that? May, June, July? Yeah, about not quite 4 months. Not quite a little bit short of 4 months, I guess. Is we went to stream, and apparently we can't stream to Twitter, which I think I'm always going to call it Twitter. I'm not going to call it X because for a number of reasons. One of which is that's just a stutid name.
You have to be careful. The Elon Musk, Iron Man, is going to ban you from Twitter eventually. Because I'm sure he has the Grok AI listening to us right now, and then if we say anything bad about Twitter, he's going to immediately ban us.
Have you used Grok at all?
I'm not. No.
Can I don't even know it.
I just listen to people like talk about it and like say, oh, it's the next greatest thing. It's going to evolve into AGI, and I was like, all right, whatever.
No. Last I saw, someone was complaining that apparently all the content on Twitter can be used to train it or something, and
it's a great model to train it. Exactly. Great reference point there.
Unless you explicitly
it's going to output the greatest memes like for forever.
Yeah. So yeah, if you tell it not to, I guess it won't. I think I asked it a question once, but I don't even know if you can use it without paying for like Twitter now. And then that's what we went to do. I went to stream because we would stream on the what is it, Dev Friday Show Twitter handle. I don't even remember what our Twitter handle is. Should scroll down to the site.
It's been so long.
I know.
I have no idea what our social accounts are.
If somehow you're listening to this and you don't know who we are, it's devfridayshow.com. And yes, it is just Dev Friday Show on Twitter. I went to stream it because we would normally put the video on there, and it won't let me because we have to be a premium X subscriber to stream video to the platform now, which I don't think I'm going to become a premium X subscriber.
I'm definitely not paying for that. I got off the LinkedIn premium train as fast as I could, so I'm not looking forward to sign up for something else.
Did that help at all?
Oh, I say yes, we did. I think we talked about that in a previous show, maybe our last show that we did, where if you are looking for a job and you're serious, especially in the IT space, I think signing up for the LinkedIn Premium for a couple months, I think it's a pricey investment.
Isn't it like $100 a month or something like that?
No, it's depending upon the plan. I think it's around like if you pay for like 6 months, which you probably don't want to do, but if you pay for it's like around $45, but then if you do month to month, it's like $60, something like that.
And then there were like tiers on top of that, weren't there? Like
it gets kind of crazy because it's mostly for recruiters for them to use to find people. But if you are just a prospective employee and want to get connected with recruiters and get connected with companies who are looking to hire. I actually do think, because you pay for it, you get bumped up in the algorithm, and you'll get more, get more inquiries of those in mails, those messages. You'll get more of
Oh,
those.
because that's what I was looking for. More people to tell me that they have an offshore team wondering if I have development needs. Anyway,
Also, you know what? Also, the best thing about if you're trying to find a job,
what's the best thing?
make sure you have a job first.
Make sure you have a job first.
Because once you are working, then, because if I count the number of messages I get on a weekly basis, asking me if I wanted to if I want to be hired as a cloud architect,
Yeah.
they're just streaming in.
What? Okay. Oh, because you say that you are one, and they
Yeah,
want to find one who is
yes.
one.
So
Yeah.
if I have that position posted on LinkedIn, I've been at the position for a little bit of time. They're like, "Oh, why don't you take this new job?" I'm like, "No, I'm good."
I mean, there's a pool of people out there. At least that's my understanding of the market right now. Why would they be reaching anyway? Yeah. So LinkedIn Premium, but I guess my question was, did it help you at all? Like, I know it connects you with more people, but like in your job search, did LinkedIn Premium play a factor?
It possibly could. I don't know, because the way that I found my job was that a recruiter found me, reached out to me. He was looking specifically, I think he was doing searches for my background. So he wanted
Okay.
somebody in academia. He wanted somebody with previous development, technical experiences, also working with
Because I don't think
databases.
I'm spilling any, like you said on LinkedIn, you see who you're working for, and it is
Mhm.
like a combination of academic and AWS, what do I want to say, cloud concepts, and like you're working still in that space. They want a
Correct.
developer who's familiar with the domain of education.
Correct.
Awesome.
So the recruiter was doing a very specific search, and that's how I found him. But I don't know if I know I was subscribed to LinkedIn Premium at the time. I don't know if the fact that did my LinkedIn Premium bump me up, farther up or in the results for him. I don't know, that I can't confirm. But I did, like I said, I was able to connect with a few companies and talk to a bunch of different recruiters. Some interviews got scheduled. I do attribute to some of that to that premium. So if you are desperately looking for a job, I do recommend it. Don't sign up for the 6 months or a year plan, but just, for a couple months, I think, why not spend $100? It's your career, right? You should probably invest in a little bit.
So so in your search, it may not have directly contributed to the job that you took, but you do know that it got you some
Oh,
interviews.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Because even knows whether or not that interview leads to a position is a helpful exercise,
I agree.
right? Because like I'm guessing, I mean, I've not done it for a while, but I'm guessing doing those interviews was helpful to kind of like get back on that bike type of thing,
Yeah.
even the ones you didn't take.
Yeah, but it's the interview is kind of like riding a bike. You just
Okay,
might be
just
a
do
little
it
bit
again.
slow at first, but you could
Yeah. All
definitely
right.
it definitely feels natural, once you can kind of get in the flow. So
Oh, we can talk about that too. I got a couple different directions we can go here. But my one question, like, did you have to do any of like the terrible interview things, like the whiteboarding code
well, I
or
think we ended off. Like I said, I probably should have gone back and listened to our last show. It was so long ago, I cannot remember what we talked about. But I think we did talk about the fact of like how I was prepping for my last interview, which was a technical interview
right, right?
with an
You
eight.
were preparing for the next interview, which yes, it was the
Yeah.
second of yours. So we never heard how that went, but apparently well.
And a little bit of background about the company that I'm working for. It is still technically a startup. It's about a 3-year-old company, really well funded by the
What
state of North
what
Carolina.
technically makes it a startup?
Well, the fact it's about getting close to like 3 years old now, and they still are. Uh, like I said, not to be start. Be careful what I say.
This is great. I love these roles being reversed.
I would just say they still consider themselves a startup. It's about a
All
50.
right.
It's about a 50-person company. Like I said, really
Okay.
well funded primarily by the state of North Carolina, because the services they provide is for universities within the UNC North Carolina college system.
Okay.
But they, like I said, it's a small company, about 50, 55, 60 people now that work for the company. So it is relatively a small company. But it's a really good company to work for. I'm enjoying the past few
So when
months
you
I've been working there. And so,
classified as a startup, it's that idea of, well, we still have that startup mentality.
correct. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Which is honestly, me, that's kind of like, that's kind of the environment that I like to be in. Like I was looking to possibly work for a larger company to kind of get back in the industry. But honestly, working kind of a smaller company, with smaller teams, more faster pace, you also have more ownership of what you're working on, more say in regards to like the design of the applications, the systems that you're working on. So it's, Like I said, especially for my position too, where I like to do a little bit of everything from the back end to the front end, from the databases to the user interactions. I kind of have the opportunity to do that. So
Nice. Well, that was a good show.
yeah.
That was a really good show. Good to be good. Now, I guess we could probably do more. We could probably do more than that. I'm looking at the notes from last time. Yeah, we talked about.
Well, we were talking about the technical interview. That was where I started to talk
Hmm.
about that. I got a
Hmm.
sidetracked to talk about. Well, I probably should say who I kind of work for. So the company is named Project Kitty Hawk. I know it's a very unique name, but
And this, to be clear, this isn't the golf cart company because you
no,
also
no, it
interviewed
is
with the
not.
golf
No,
cart company,
that was in.
and
Yeah, that's what I did talk about that, which was just a good experience, just an interview experience, and was possibly looking to turn it into a consulting gig, but then this became my current job became a full-time position. So didn't I'm not doing anything on a consulting basis.
gotcha, gotcha.
So the company I work for is called Project Kitty Hawk. I know it's a very interesting name, but if you know anything about the North Carolina
Oh yeah,
history of
yeah,
the
yeah.
of the Kitty
The Wright
Hawk with
brothers.
the Wright brothers, yeah, that's where they came up with the name. And so, like I said, it is a educational technology company.
Which
They pro-
just to take it because this is how the show works. This is how the show
Will you
works.
just interrupt me every time when I'm trying to
Exactly, exactly.
do
Did
a
you
little
know?
background here?
Well, you started it. You opened up Your Honor. He opened up the door by mentioning the Wright brothers. I did not realize how old. I forget which one lived to be the oldest,
Okay, I
but
did
I
not
did
know that
not
either.
realize how old they were and what they saw. Because like these guys, I mean, all right, now I'm trying to think of my aviation history. They're the ones that are noted with, yeah, they built the first plane flew it. I don't know if they actually built the first, like I don't, because I think there were many people trying that, but they're the
Hmm.
ones that are noted for it. Either way, pioneers in flight. We weren't doing it before them. They were part of the first people to actually do manned flight. They lived like whichever one of the brothers lived the oldest lived so long. Like I think he saw fighter jets.
Really
Can
interesting.
you imagine seeing the technology that you kind of helped pioneer all the way up to like what it then became? That's got to be fascinating.
Healthy living. He must have ate well and
Yeah,
exercised.
he was. I'll look it up. But anyway, so you did the technical interview, doing the
Okay.
technical interview with Project Kitty Hawk. Yeah,
Okay, so let me just give a little more background about the company. Like I said, I
yeah.
can't talk too much about internally what I'm doing, but I could just want to definitely give some background. So, they provide an educational platform for universities, primarily universities within North Carolina, so within the UNC system. And basically, we build like data platforms that enables for online learning, so that if you're going to have like online learning systems like Canvas or Blackboard,
Right.
or even like student registration systems,
Are any of those good?
recruitment systems.
Because you've had to use them as a teacher, and I've never heard people like rave about any of those.
Canvas is definitely better than Blackboard, I would
Okay.
say, but it's definitely has its rough edges too. It's not
Okay.
perfect, but using all these existing, primarily third party kind of platforms, and then basically building a data lake around them and integrating all of them together, and then providing this as a service to universities for online learning.
Gotcha.
So could definitely go in a little bit more detail than that, but that's kind of just get a little bit of background. So, so like I said, it is a young company, only about going on their close to the third year,
Yeah, yeah.
and but the way that the platform has been built so far has been primarily using AWS consultants, or specifically AWS Pro Server, which is the consulting arm of AWS. And so they AWS has pretty much built out the let's say 80 to 90% of the platform that they have today. And what they've looked to do is then to hire an internal team to start to migrate away, still staying on AWS as a service. We're not going to be moving off AWS anytime soon, because basically everything's built around AWS, but moving away from consultants as being the primary designers, developers of the platform, still staying on primarily as consultants if we have questions here or there, but moving away from the professional services arm of AWS and then moving into more internal. So I was hired along with 2 to 3 other architects, developers, who are then basically going to take the job away from AWS consultants and to handle internally.
I'm guessing those consultants probably aren't too sad about that because is this like it also feels like you're doing more too. Like it's like, hey, we need to accelerate this development. So yes, thank you for helping us get this all set up. But now
Well,
we
it's
really need to start.
yeah, and that's been happening. It's interesting. When I got hired, the team that we were working with from AWS was still around maybe less than 10. But
Okay.
apparently, when early, like that during that first year, there was like 20 or 30 AWS consultants. Like there was a good number.
That's a lot.
Yes, there was like a good number of consultants that were working with them, and then they slowly kind of rolled back the number, and I think then it stayed around a little bit less than 10. There are two developers that were architects that we're working with, and they're going to stay on till the end of to September, beginning of October, and they've been around since the very very beginning. So it's interesting, kind of seeing their perspective, how
Yeah.
it is kind of their baby. They
Right, right,
designed it,
right.
they built it up from the end, and they do want to leave it in a good place too. So what they're doing is, while I'm still getting online and building out some new features on the platform, and still getting my head wrapped around the whole system. They're kind of making sure that doing any refinements, performance improvements, any kind of code debt that they need to clean up. They're kind of permanently focused on that, while we're internally thinking about, from a business perspective, what features that we should be kind of building out with them, but then trying to enable a smooth transition as they roll off during, let's say, the end of September, beginning of October. Then we'll be able to handle everything on our own.
Gotcha. So how did the technical interview go?
So the technical interview, that was interesting. So that was
Yeah.
so went through the first two interviews, which we talked about previously. And I think, yeah, when we left each other and our last episode, I was alluding to the fact I was going to have a technical interview with the lead AWS consultant that has basically
Right.
been around for the beginning. So I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is a technical interview. So what I do is I went over the technologies that are in the job ad. So knowing, TypeScript, Python, knowing PySpark, Python pandas, knowing all these data management libraries, wrangling. I cannot speak now. I'm trying to recollect what it was that interview, but I went through all the technical requirements in the job posting. I think, okay, what type of questions are going to be asked? Is there going to be coding questions? Is there going to be like system design questions? So I was thinking, okay, from a system design, data lake architecture, data modeling, I think I'm pretty good with that, especially from my database experience and what I was also currently doing from consulting perspective as I was kind of working out of academia. So I thought I was pretty comfortable with that. But then going back to the Python, I was like, well, I've done a good amount of Python in the past, but really probably need to brush up on Python, also SQL too. I've done a huge amount of SQL in the past. Actually, that was one of my first languages out of college. So, being a database programmer, spending a lot of time working with SQL or SQL over my career. But I was thinking, oh, I've actually written hand coded any SQL in actually a good period of time, because I've mostly just been doing like mostly Python and a little bit of SQL here or there, but mostly just for like just doing some simple queries. And so I was like, all right, I got to really kind of brush up on this. I got to get back to my inner outer joins, my establishing my views, my kind of basically want to kind of brush up on that. So I spent the weekend going through all of like some Python with pandas exercises and my SQL exercises, like some coding exercises, and really try to cram for this technical interview that was going to be happening. And what happened in the interview then?
I'm guessing, based on the setup, you weren't asked a lot of those questions.
No, there was no Python questions asked at all. No SQL questions asked at all. No programming problems. He just wanted to know about my experience. Just ask me about projects I worked on. Talk about some previous projects and what I did and how they went. Talked about kind of what I'm working on currently. Where would be some weak areas for improvement, and really just a very kind of general, open-ended kind of technical discussion, which was actually pretty nice. But the fact that I prepped for it in the complete wrong direction, I was like, which was interesting, because the recruiter I was working with actually did a real good job preparing me, or kind of give me an idea of what they wanted to discuss in the previous two interviews, so I could kind of have just a good general idea. And like I met with the data team and the product team, like that was the second interview, so I had a good idea kind of what they wanted to discuss and what they were interested in talking with me. So I was able to kind of prep a little bit for that interview, but the recruiter had no idea what was going to be asked in this third interview, so I just had to go on my own, and went in a completely wrong direction, but that's okay.
Seems like it worked out either way. Yeah.
It did, yeah. So don't worry about over preparing for a technical interview, because, like I said, it's it won't be as bad as it is. Well, it could be, but
It could be.
In my case, it wasn't. So
yeah. So no one asked you to whiteboard any code or anything like that.
maybe in the next interview, we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so things going well there?
Yeah, no, it's everything. Yeah, everything's going good. Like you talked about, you might want to talk about Glue and some data pipelines. That's pretty much what we work on. Like, I think eventually we'll start to build some more front end tooling kind of getting back to my front end experience. I'm probably going to be starting to do that a little bit more over the next like 6 months to the year as you start thinking about building some custom infrastructure, some custom tooling over top of AWS. But pretty much everything else is done through the CDK. Doing deployments with
Right.
deploying infrastructure with the CDK and a lot of data pipelines. So building out working with Glue, your step functions, your Lambda functions, and tying them all together with the CDK and building out the infrastructure there. That's primarily what I've been spending a lot of time with.
Yeah, I'd like to, and maybe we go there in a second because I got some questions. But want to take it a slightly different direction first. Like kids starting school, and so got some Surface. What do we get? Just some Surfaces, right? Because the Surface laptop, I don't like that it doesn't have the touch screen, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
And you're talking about the cost of this. This does tie back. It does tie back because we're talking about the cost of LinkedIn Pro and not keeping that. And I had
Okay.
looked at Copilot Pro, and like to get it because I have a 365 subscription for the family, which is pretty affordable, honestly.
Hmm.
Office 365, but to add Copilot Pro, it's like $20 a month per seat. And
Yeah.
if I've got
Yeah.
one, two, three, four kids using it plus me, it's like there's what in the world? Can
They don't
you?
have a family plan because you
No, they
get like
don't. It
five
doesn't
seats
sit. No,
for.
it's doesn't seem like it. Everything
Hmm.
I looked at it was a per, and I was talking with somebody else today. We saw a dev on the team posted like we were joking about somebody with a nickname, and he asked ChatGPT what his nickname would be, and it came back with, well, it should be this because you're a coach. And he's like, wow, how did you know I was a coach? He's like, well, you told me that in a previous
Mhm.
conversation, because ChatGPT remembers that stuff, and I have. So the kids use my ChatGPT account, so it remembers stuff about them too. So it's very confused about who I am, but it was still like this thing. It's a useful tool, but I can't see that cost. Like to imagine to deploy it at scale. Like
Mhm.
if you wanted everybody on your team using it, like at $20 a month,
Yeah.
I just don't see it there
Well,
yet.
that's how they're gonna be made. That's how Microsoft and all these companies have to make money now because they have to sell AI. That's what as a service.
Because well, yeah, and the compute resources I guess are expensive,
Mhm.
but still, it's like it's a useful thing. But I can't imagine just to expose like from an educational standpoint to allow to make it easy for my kids to use this to do the stuff that they need to do, which is I
Mhm.
think important because as what do I want to say not as many different opinions as there are about generative AI, and most of the time they're crazy because like and it's the proponents of it that I think shoot themselves in the foot and try to make it seem like you were talking about with Grok, like we'd
Mhm.
hit AGI, like Grok is somehow going to become. We're just guessing what the next word would be. That's in a simplistic
Yeah.
explanation of what it's doing. It's just guessing what the next word would be. It's machine learning that's been given a whole lot more data, and I know there's more than that. I know but that's what it is, and for students to understand how to apply that and how to leverage it for the things that it is useful for are I think are key. But I can't imagine spending like $100 a month for my kids to be able to use it in conjunction with because that would be nice, right?
Mhm.
You're in the word processor writing something. You're like, hey, I wrote this. Can you help me figure out how to rephrase this so it's more, in whatever the tone is supposed to be, a more professional, more conversational, or more narrative, and like have those tools help you with that, which we should learn how to use because they're there now. But
It,
that's just that price point. It's just I'm not there yet
it
at
is
that
it
point.
is pricey. I can understand that. It's paying for a family. I paid for the ChatGPT Pro for a few months. Also, I tried out Gemini Pro too. Kind of see. I don't know if it was a huge amount of improvement compared to I could tell a definite improvement if you pay for the
You mean
GPT.
improvement from Gemini to Gemini Pro, not the
Yeah,
same
I don't
as
know. Maybe
ChatGPT
the
to yeah.
yeah, like I definitely saw a speed improvement and a
Okay.
responsiveness, and also I thought the responses were better when you paid for ChatGPT. Was it ChatGPT Plus, I believe?
Yeah, whatever it
So
was.
I thought there was a benefit to that, especially if you use it every day. We go from the Gemini to Gemini Pro. No, no, I didn't see as
What was the
much of a
price
benefit
point
there.
there?
The
What was
$20. It's
oh,
everything's $20.
everything's $20.
Yeah,
And that's the other thing. It's like I already paid $20 for ChatGPT, and now you want me to pay $20 for Copilot Pro, which I know is
yeah.
using the same the same models. It's just embedded in
So
Office software.
it's interesting getting back to the workplace and business, because I think you mentioned in the past where you don't use ChatGPT or even a lot of these AI coding tools because of intellectual IP or
Oh, and there's
or concerns with how they'll be handled, like when you're working a private code base
those
at your work.
those are legitimate concerns. I will
Yeah.
say though, no, I do use them. I mean, they're concerns that we have to address, but no,
So
I use Copilot,
so it's interesting where since
which
when
also is confusing because it's GitHub Copilot, not Microsoft Copilot, which is a
mhm.
different thing.
So when I worked in academia, I would always talk about, especially on the podcast, how I was using
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT or Gemini for just like writing descriptions for like assignments. I was
Mm-hmm.
using it a ton. It was a huge time saver for me
It's great.
to generate content that I had to produce in my course and to automate that as much as possible. I was using it all the time. I have actually not touched an
Really?
AI tool since starting the new job. I
Is it?
wouldn't say I'm not permanent. Like there were probably a couple personal things I have opened up, like me Gemini for like just for some research purposes, but really more for personal reasons.
Yeah.
But for my work, I have not, because they and my company did also specify that they do have a very strict AI policy currently, because it makes sense because of the data that we handle. We have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of PII data because it's all student academic records
Right. Right.
and information. And you do think twice, because it would be helpful to say, oh, if I have this data set, the CSV or this JSON file of all this data, and saying, oh, could I generate some test cases off of this? Or could I generate, maybe a Python
The
script
first step is
to query this CSV file? I don't know, whatever. So if I just wanted to throw this into an AI generator and give me some code back in order to analyze this data, you're putting this private data into a third party system,
Yeah.
and you don't know how that's going to be used. So
First
I
step is ask
totally
one
understand.
chat to anonymize the data and trust
Yeah.
it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, take this data, anonymize it. Yeah.
Yeah. Please remove the PII from this.
That sounds like $1 billion startup idea if I ever heard one.
So now that's the other thing. I get questions sometimes, eh, like someone will ask, is it safe to put this in Google Docs, or is it safe to put this in
Mhm.
in GitHub? Will, especially if it's confidential,
Yeah.
or and in the context sometimes it's not. I mean, it is still confidential, but it's more like, hey, it's proprietary, right? Like this is stuff we don't want other people to know.
Yeah.
And my answer is usually like, well, I mean, they say they're not going to use it, but
Yeah, you don't know.
what do you know
You don't
for
know.
any of it, right? What do you know for any of it?
Y
So that's the first, like anywhere you put something online, yeah, they
Mhm.
say they don't have access to it, but do they? That's the one question.
Yeah.
And then and I say that as the preface to then say, like right now I have ChatGPT Pro myself that I use for a lot of personal stuff. Like I use it to generate content for studies and things like that.
Mhm.
And then in school, like we generate most of our history curriculum. It sounds
Yeah.
weird to say it. We don't generate our history. It's used as an aid to help us generate the structure of it. So, I mean, to give an example, pretty much said we're going to study industrial revolution across the world. Give me a set of books that we can, as a group, read, because that's
Yeah. And
what a lot of our history
that's
is.
a real great use of. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
gives them, and then I can say, can you give me a reading plan because it happens to know how many
Mhm.
pages. But I did check it on that, and sometimes it was wrong. So I looked at the pages from the library and I told it, here are the pages. Actually, I started telling it, and I was like, you know what, I should just take a picture because it, 4.0 can process images just fine. And uploaded them, and then it did a much better job at creating a reading schedule. So things like that I use it personally for, but I also have a business account from the company, and that, whatever the checks are, and at least
Mm.
again, it's what they tell you. I know we're
And
trusting them.
that is the GitHub Copilot that you have that
Oh, that
enterprise account
no,
with.
we have GitHub Copilot, and we also have ChatGPT. They have
Oh, really?
a
Okay.
business ChatGPT. Yeah, yeah, and I've got a seat there, and there the configuration comes and says we are not using your data for training. Again, are they? I mean, yes, I realize we're trusting them. And is Google looking into your Google Docs?
It is interesting
I
because
don't
you
know.
are signing a legal document with them. So if you
If
ever
you could
found out,
prove
if
it,
you prove
yeah,
it, you could really sue them for a lot of money based on that
right,
document. Because like I said, it's on them then to make sure that they're not using it for any other
right.
purposes or I know it is interesting. We actually have a GitHub enterprise, not consultant, but oh, what's those people called who work for a
Like
company, account manager or
oh
whatever?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we met with them. That was one of the questions came up saying, we're curious about using AI as a tool, but actually it's a policy now just to not use them. And in my editors, actually, I still have, well, me, Tim, I only run NeoVim.
Right. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
talked about that, right? So
We
that's what I primarily use.
we talked about that.
I don't run any AI in that. I keep that as clean as possible. But I do have Visual Studio Code that I keep up on because there is, for certain code bases, it's easier to navigate
We
with
have a
Visual
dev
Studio
on the
Code.
team that added Copilot to Vim,
No, you can do it. Don't worry.
and
I know how to do
works.
it.
It apparently works really, really well.
I have done it before. Don't worry. I've done it
Yeah.
20 different ways. But like I said, I like keeping my NeoVim clean, tight, very efficient. Because I'm all about just letting my fingers flow over the keyboard like butter, and I want to just be as smooth
I'm ready
as
for
possible.
the next step where Mark's like, all that I do, it's just bullet journaling. That's what it is. Because
it was funny. So we do a lot of screen sharing, a lot of especially as we work with AWS. And there was when I was sharing my screen and we're working through an issue, and I had my NeoVim turned on, and the lead architect was like, "You're using Vim? It's like you should really use like Visual Studio Code or use like JetBrains products." And I was like, "Well, I've been using this for years." It's like, no, he's like, no, it's like it's so much easier to search for the code. I was like, okay. So we had a little bit of back and forth there.
I never need to take my fingers off the keyboard.
And then he was even talking about the fact like, oh, how he uses the Amazon's Q or the what is it, their AI tool? It is Q.
Q is the one that you should be able to set with it's supposed to answer questions about Amazon.
But then you turn on the there's a code lens. I can't remember because I actually don't use it. The AWS Amazon's kind of a Copilot in the editor. Because like I said,
I've not heard great things about that.
It really, when I turn it on, it usually doesn't just suggest anything to me. So that's why I feel like I just keep it off.
It's like I don't even know where you are. I've got nothing.
So I do have these tools, and also I do have WebStorm installed. So I occasionally may or PyCharm Professional or have that installed. So and I do have the tools included as a plugin, but usually I just have them deactivated. I have to ask
this question: do you technically get still academic licenses for all these?
No, I lost my email account. And I can't do that. I tried to. I tried to keep it
because Project Kitty Hawk is. I didn't know if it's close enough.
No, I can't do that now. I tried to keep that going as far as I could, but yeah, my college, because I'm not teaching there anymore, even as an adjunct, so they turned off my email account. So I don't. If I was able to keep my academic email account, I could have kept that going a little bit longer, but no. So I don't get any educational discounts anymore.
It's like University of Panama or wherever you get those certificates from.
It's true.
You're like, oh, you've got a degree from where? They're also selling email addresses for Mark.
Yeah. So the whole reason I bring this up, the fact like I've not used AI actually for the past few months, and actually I don't miss it that much.
Yeah.
Like just in my editor, I don't because before when I was working in academia, I was pretty dependent on it. Like because
you were doing a lot of the examples.
Yeah. When I wanted generate assignments, example code, reference material, like it was the best. So every week I was pounding the AI and trying to get as much as I could from it. Now since I'm just gone back to working on especially private code bases, and I'm like, I don't need as much because it's interesting too as you especially if you start working with a large code base. Once getting familiar with that's the biggest time sink, which it just takes so much time just to become familiar with it, to know where, especially when you're dealing with like a microservice architecture where there's so many different repositories, so many different functions. How do all these pieces fit together
in different repos?
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
So like kind of understanding how all this fits together, that takes a huge amount of time. But once you do that, then you will realize, well, I have a lot of code I could use as a reference. So if I need to build out a new Lambda function, or if I need to build out a new data pipeline, I have 3 or 4 different data pipelines I could use as a reference. So then I'm saying I'm not going to copy that pipeline exactly, but I could use probably about maybe 60 to 80% of that code is basically the same. Now, could that be refactored and make this more, modular, and so I could reuse it, between the 2 pipelines? That's a possibility.
Yeah, probably,
but I have a lot of good code that I could basically use as a reference. We talked about copy and pasting and moving code from place to place, and that actually is what I've been doing. And then changing the code bases where it need to be for for the specific pipeline. So I don't need I haven't found that I need the AI tools as much, but they are still there. And I did also talk to my AWS consultant friend as we're going back and forth about the AI too. He's like, factor like, oh, I use Amazon's AI tools. It's totally fine. It's totally secure. It's encrypted. You don't have to worry about it. It's like, and I was like, oh, well, you work for
No
AWS,
one's no one's concerned about the encryption. We're
yeah.
concerned about where
But
it
it's
goes after the
interesting.
fact.
The AWS has internal policy, which you'll find this interesting, which you
Yeah,
may not know. They're not allowed to use Postman. Postman.
because the phone's home. Yeah.
Yeah, because every query
Yeah.
that you're using, the data is passing, which I did not know that,
Mm-hmm.
but it is. And so,
Mm-hmm.
does your company? Because to Postman is so super useful. That's one tool. I don't know if I could give up. I could definitely give
You
up the
can
AI
give it,
tools.
you can give that up easily.
I don't know. I know it's been.
Come on. So here's the deal. Here's how you give up Postman. Sorry, Postman people. Also, not a sponsor. Sorry.
Well, they're definitely not going to sponsor us like
No,
this.
no, not anymore. If you're using a JetBrains IDE,
Oh, just use your ID directly instead of using
yeah,
Postman
like
query.
JetBrains.
Yeah,
If
that's true.
you just create an HTTP request, hit play,
Hmm.
it'll run it. It'll show you. It'll save the output.
Hmm.
It'll let you easily save those to a file. It's super easy to
Well,
just edit
okay, so
HTTP requests.
you know how in Postman you have the workspace feature, where you can set up basically all of your environmental variables or properties
I've
that
not
your
used it
API.
enough, but yes,
That is super useful because basically, especially if you are using a heavily API oriented architecture where you have a
Yeah.
huge amount of APIs and they all depend upon very similar
keys and tokens
variables.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's setting it up as a workspace or an environment within Postman saves a huge amount of time. Also, passing that workspace or environment to other developers. So if you want to onboard somebody else and say, okay, these are our APIs, this is how you access it, you just basically give them this workspace, Postman file or set of files, and then they can just import that and they're good to go. So that is getting up to speed with an API it's been really, really fast using Postman.
Because you can set all those environments up, all those like environment style variables up in JetBrains.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Does JetBrains have a
Yep.
kind of similar workspace style feature where you could basically replicate that workflow?
The passing of it around, I think you can, because I think it's just a file, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And
Like
then
a
you
configuration
can
file.
Yeah, you can reference variables in a scripting like language when you're like crafting the HTTP requests.
Mm-hmm.
Because in JetBrains, it's not like the UI that you see in Postman where you're like, oh, select your method. It's literally just here's the text of the HTTP request.
Yeah.
And you see all the headers and you just change it however you want, which I find very nice because like don't hide it all in these menus for me. Just let me see the HTTP request. I understand how that works.
Oh, okay. As I'm praising Postman too, there was one issue which I can't go in detail about this.
Yeah.
Because we're working with a third-party API provider that basically they provide an API for a university, and then we interface with that API to get their data back and forth. So we asked them to make an update on their API that in order for us to, for a data pipeline that we're working with, and they said they made the update and they migrated or they promoted that update from their development environment to their QA testing environment, and we were using the QA testing environment for testing it out, and I could not see the update. And it was just also, I brought in the other AWS developers, brought this in. We were kind of banging our heads against, why do we not see this update? We were going back and forth with them. They're saying, oh yeah, it's in our system. It's in the staging environment. It's there. And half the time, and there was inconsistencies with there was a delay for them promoting it from the environment. So there was that issue, but also the bigger issue, the fact I could not see it was because Postman was caching the keys between it from the dev to the QA keys. And even though I saw the QA keys in Postman at, since putting that text box there and I could see it behind the scenes, it was caching it. So I had to basically reboot my computer to clear that out and clear out the cache. Because in the end, I know Postman is basically just using browser technology too. So it's it basically is probably using the same code base that Visual Studio Code's based off of that Electron. And who knows, that's basically just a browser based React style
is really Visual
platform.
Studio Code on Electron. I didn't realize.
No, I'm just guessing that's what it is.
Okay,
because it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like it's basically just, especially also how it caches data, within the interface. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa. I was like, okay. Even though I love Postman and it's been a great tool, I still use it. But there is
Yeah.
a part of me that doesn't trust it, especially when it comes to the environmental variables that he uses. And so what I may have to do if I don't specifically trust, I'll just copy and paste and put it directly within the headers of that request, so making sure that I'm guaranteed that
Oh, right.
it's
Instead of,
that
yeah,
state.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's, yeah. So,
Yeah, I wasted
so
probably about 2 or 3 hours banging my head about that,
that's
and it
the
was like, yeah,
worst.
it was just a software caching issue.
That's the worst. So yeah,
Yeah.
Storm, you just edit the regular request, and they've got a little bit of like a variable syntax you can use to inject environment variables and also inject code too.
Mhm.
I forget what scripting languages they use for that, but you can do stuff like, oh, take this response from the. I think you can even chain it and say like, get this data from the last response, parse the last response, and then update
Mhm.
this. So you can do
Yeah.
some interesting things
Yeah.
in JetBrains
I'll have to take a look at that.
with
And so is that
requests.
built in? Is that just an additional plugin, or is it available in
No, it
all?
should be built in. I think to all of the JetBrains IDEs as long as the file's .http.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So it's a specific file type.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
mean,
a
I guess you
configuration.
could open it with like you could tell it, hey, no, do this with this other file. But yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, or you could create a scratch file and say that the type is HTTP, and
Okay.
then you just literally fill out like post URL
Mhm.
and then put your headers underneath it. And if you have
Okay.
a
So it's
body,
it's kind of
do
like a notebook, like a Jupyter data, kind of
yeah, yeah,
library
yeah. No,
notebook.
very much.
Okay, interesting.
And you just follow the HTTP spec, right? So if you need to post data, 2 line feeds, and then there's your data. And what I find super nice about that is we'll put in example HTTP requests, example responses, and we'll just put them as files in the system. If you would want to run that, you could, but we use it in testing. It's like I ran this file. This is the response I got back from the API. So then, therefore, use this request as the thing that you assert that I made. Use this response as the thing that you mock that came back.
Yeah.
So we can build some tests around vendors without actually hitting them. Obviously, we don't really want to do that. But no, I find that super useful. The other thing for just goofing around and making requests and stuff, if you don't want to do it in an IDE, HTTP, if you've not seen that, is to me like it's what curl should have been.
And this is a command line tool?
Yes. Now they do have a Postman like desktop app as well. I've not dug into that because I don't really have a use for it. But it's super nice. Like instead of all the weird headers you have to always pass curl to get it to do the things that you should just want it to do by default. HTTP does a lot of that by default. Like if you start passing it parameters, it will by default, or not parameters. If you start passing it like data, it'll be by default JSON encode it
Hmm.
because like why wouldn't you do that? And a couple other just same thing like setting headers are super easy. Curl makes them a little bit weird. And yeah, it's and setting the method is super easy. So yeah, HTTP is a great resource for
Well, I will take a look at, like I said, I do have WebStorm installed that I occasionally use.
yeah, just
But
make a
so
.http file.
I'll take a look at it. Yeah.
No, I find it very useful. I remember they rolled this out years ago now, and I remember doing some live demos with API tooling, um, and uh, and showing that off. And like it's great because you're talking about other things, or maybe it was API design or whatever I was talking about. But then when
Mhm.
after the talk, people come up like, "Hey, how'd you do that thing with PHP Storm where you made the web request?" I'm like, okay, so that was it. That was the most interesting part of this talk was that you didn't know that they had that built in.
Hmm.
But no, it's really useful. Um, and another thing you said about them making that change for you in QA,
Mhm.
there's an article that I haven't written yet, but I know has been requested for PHP Architect. Because I'm very much a you should not version your APIs.
Hmm.
And I used to give
Yeah.
a talk. It was like
Yeah.
three wrong ways to version your API
You know,
because they're all wrong.
but just yesterday I was asking
Mm.
a vendor, say, could you provide a version number in your response, or maybe even if I could do that in the request, so I could basically know exactly what version I'm using, that would actually help me to debug some issues.
That and so that's where my perspective comes from. It's like seriously now you're going to have two versions of an API. How
Well,
hard
okay.
is that to support?
Okay, so
Mhm.
yes, so but if they are versioning the API anyway behind the
Oh,
scenes,
then they better. But that like my
yeah,
point is like why would you get yourself into that scenario
yeah.
where you have to have two different response types, where people actually ask for different versions? I just That's
Yeah, it's just like
like you're
where
going to continue to support all these things?
yeah, when you have a vendor saying, "Oh, tell me tell me what version of the API that you're using to access, that you're calling with." I was like, honestly, I would love to know that. I was like, if you give me the version number,
I
that would
know,
solve a
I have
lot of
no
issues for
idea.
me, so I can verify what version I'm using.
And also, there's versions to your API. This was news to us.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
No, seriously, I think about, oh my god, I got to put in a support request. I was like, we got to get this built in. So like every time I make a response back, I want to know what version of the API I'm
Well, if
using.
they're
So I can,
doing
yeah,
it, yeah, they
yeah,
better. Like that's the thing. If you versioned your API and you are not sending that back in the response to
yeah,
tell the client what response
yeah,
version this is,
yeah.
I mean, what do you expect from them? Oh man,
And they said they gave me a response by saying, "Oh, we don't know if we could do that, so we would have to hard code the version of it." I was like,
they're
"All right, I
we'd have
won't
to
push too hard." But
we'd have to version our API because this would be a breaking change for the version that you're on to include the version.
exactly.
So version 5 does tell you that it's version 5, but version 4 does not because that would have broken the contract of version 4.
So when you're saying you're not a fan of versioning your APIs, you're also talking about specifically, I believe, because we talked about this before, about putting the version number within the URL that so you can reference the version with
No,
the
I don't like that.
request.
Don't like that
You
at
don't
all.
like that, yeah.
Well, I don't like that because then
Which
you're saying that
is that still a popular thing to
I
do?
don't
Because actually, I
know.
don't see that as much done anymore.
It feels weird to me because you're saying here's the URI that represents this thing.
Hmm.
Is version 2 a different thing?
Yeah, yeah,
Because it's the same thing, right? And then you can version it by saying, well, this is I accept different version responses. And then I'm just like, you really want to support different version responses? You want to continue for like how long are you going to be doing that? Like, wouldn't it be better for you just to add on the new property everybody wants?
yeah.
Let it be there for a couple months before you deprecate the one you don't want everybody to use anymore. Like that seems like a whole lot. Oh, but they should be different versions. We'll just deprecate 2 and make it. It's so hard. Why are you making it hard? Anyway, so I'll have to. Maybe we'll have to write that. We'll have to write that article. So
Yeah.
all right, we got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about glue because
Yeah,
all right, I've been
curious what kind
haven't
of glue work you've been doing.
I haven't actually got into it myself yet, but it's because and for those, yeah, I don't know if we should say you showed me some stuff before, and I'm having a hard time remembering exactly how the pipeline works.
Well, glue is a service, so glue is an AWS service, and there's different parts of the service. So depending upon how you're trying to use it, so you could do glue jobs,
Right?
that could then basically you could either you could using the glue
And glue's ETL, right?
yeah, so it's an extract, transform, and load, service, right? So if you want to basically take some data, move it from one place to the next, transform the data a little bit, then yeah, glue's a managed service for that.
And what there's 2 things that we like that would be great to do, and we're trying to figure out where they fit because we're also playing. Tell me how a step function interacts with glue.
Well, a step function can run a glue crawler, which is basically it's part of the managed service where you specify a location like an S3 bucket, and you say, okay, I want to crawl this S3 bucket to get the data from there, and then if I want to take that data and then load that data into an Athena database, so I can then query that data from that bucket, I could do that with the glue crawler. Okay, so basically, a crawler is just meant for and glue's running the crawlers, and the glue and crawlers can be scheduled, be managed. And you talk about a step function. A step function can trigger a glue crawler, but also could trigger a Lambda function, which then could call a glue job or ETL job. But step function is basically just used to basically to manage the processors or jobs that are within glue.
Okay, so let's say if you have a step function, that runs a Lambda, that's a Lambda function too, right? Like or Lambda. Call
you could do it. Yes, you could do it either way. I said the common way is to basically call a Lambda function, and that Lambda function then could call another glue process or
could do some
but you could also also reference glue directly from a step function too. So if you want to run a job, that's fine.
Okay, no, but let's say we got something where we got a Lambda function that's gonna look at a file and it's gonna do some stuff.
Yep.
So glue is just the ETL layer.
Correct. Yeah.
The step function is the kind of pipeline layer.
It's the orchestration.
Okay.
Yeah.
What triggers the step function?
An event, usually you could either do primarily from using EventBridge. So EventBridge is basically like your managed cron job on the AWS services.
So they just do this every.
Yep.
Like look at this S3, like this event happens, and that tells the step function, look at this S3 bucket for new files.
Yep. You could also
Could
do
you do like SNS or SQS for that?
if you want to. Okay, well, back up. What specifically are you looking at? Because if you're talking about SQS, you're talking about some type of queuing system where you basically want to send like a message or
Yeah,
some
like to
data that you
say
want to basically put in a queue to then process it later
right,
or send
right. We have
someplace else.
let's say we have real time data,
Hmm.
and then we could just say, I have got it. I want this to be processed. Like, I don't want to shove this right into a database because
Hmm.
I have to enrich this data first.
Hmm.
So I could throw that in maybe SQS or SNS and then have that trigger a step function. No?
That's a good question. I don't
Okay.
know. First of all, I don't know why you'd want to, because usually step function is basically just a way to orchestrate a series of processes that you need to coordinate together, right? So either they're going to be sequential or not sequential, or you want to know when something, let's say when something succeeds or something fails, so you can kind of redo a specific steps. So that's what the name comes from, step function. So it's just a series of steps that you can kind of manage. So if you're using a queue and you have some data going through the queue, and you want to say the data gets to the end of that queue, then you want to then put it through another process. You could, I guess, what I would do is just have it connect to a Lambda function. Then that Lambda could then pass it and then run it through to a step function. But a step function is meant to receive data.
Okay.
That's why I'm kind of
Let me
I'm not saying it's not possible because I'd have to double check that. But usually you don't send data to a step function.
let me give
You
an
could set up
example
you
use
could set
case.
some send properties to a step function, saying, okay, this is like some properties I want to pass this to like some configuration. You could do
Yeah.
that. But really, for if you, let's say, have some file data that you want to then send someplace else, I don't know if I would send that directly to a step function.
So this is me breaking the cardinal rule of contracting, which is like the person who, because if this was a relationship, if Mark's the AWS expert, right? I'm coming to him and I'm
No,
asking
I am
him.
certified, Tim.
He's a certified AWS expert. I'm coming to him and I'm asking him questions about something that I want to do, but I'm unfortunately telling him how I'm already thinking about doing it,
Mm-hmm.
which is biasing the conversation. And as a consultant or a
Mm.
contractor or a domain expert, or anything, what you want to do is you want to like push back at me and say, like, what is the thing that you're trying to do?
It's
So
true.
I'm gonna give you.
That's why I asked, what type of data are we working with here,
Right.
so I can understand a little
Let me
more.
give you an example. There's a guy I follow online. He's built a couple different businesses that are interesting. He's playing with something new called Tool Stash, and we've got what 8 minutes left, so we'll definitely be able to cover this. It's a cool app where if you want to just inventory the tools that you have, you take a picture and it does, I'm assuming, some type of machine learning on it, like
Nice.
image
Yep, I got
recognition,
it.
and it's like, oh, you've got the Craftsman, tape measure, and then you have it in your list of tools. So if someone says, do you have one of these, you go, oh, I do, and you can borrow it. So that's the whole point of this app, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
cool thing is you're not typing in all the tools you have, you're just taking pictures,
Because who
identifying
does
it.
that?
Right.
That's a pain.
So this is the for instance then. So he's obviously got a stream of images that then he has to do classification, which I'm guessing then would be a Lambda function that could execute some type of SageMaker machine learning
Okay.
model that would identify it. So it's like I'm going from here's image file, and then what I want to get is enriched data, which tells me things about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right in my SageMaker, my model is set up to do that. What How would he manage that? I take a picture on the app, it uploads it somewhere. What
Yep.
what what orchestrates the whole, we got to pass this to a Lambda function, and then we need to get it into a database, and I don't want to do that in code, because why would I not let something like a pipeline take care of it, so I don't have to write the code for it?
So what I would first is get that imaged into a bucket, right? You need to get stored somewhere.
Okay, so
I
stored in
wouldn't try to
S3.
handle the data for that kind of in stream, saying, okay, I'm gonna, which you guess you could do. You could just send that image, that binary data into a stream, into a queue, like we were talking about before, and then process it kind of in line. But what I would do is I would just have that image landed somewhere, right? So
Okay.
you have that file stored, right? So in worst case, you could always go back to that file, right? You don't want to lose a file, because I have seen with queues, messages can be stuck in queues and can be lost in queues, right? So you want to have that data landed somewhere. Now, how do you then trigger a process from that? Well, you could do that with a simple Lambda function, like an event, right? So if a file gets updated in a bucket, you know how to do this. It's going to trigger a Lambda function that you could have it do something with. And if you want to trigger a glue crawler to go crawl that bucket, or you want to just
So
look at the files inside of there.
the event is new object in S3 bucket.
Yeah. So what I would, it depends on also how often you want to have. So two approaches. You could have more of an event based architecture where if you every time that image lands inside that bucket, a Lambda function gets triggered and then can process the data that's been changed inside that bucket. Or you could use more of a batch process where you say, okay, I'm going to land all these images into these buckets. Let's say every, I don't know, every 5 minutes, every hour, once a day, twice a day. You then are going to run a process like a crawler that's going to then look at the data in the bucket and then start to process that data. So I'd first get that imaged into a bucket and then figure out then how often do you process. Now, if this is going to be more real time, like you're talking about inside of an app,
Right.
where you need to get some feedback, then yeah, you want to have some type of event that gets triggered from that update in that bucket and then be able to call a Lambda function that could then, if it's going to then trigger a step function, which you could do from a Lambda function, that'd be more appropriate. And then to then start the process saying, okay, I want to go look at that image, I want to load it into a SageMaker or wherever you
Hmm.
want to do your processing for of that image to get the analysis saying, okay, there's this many screwdrivers and this many hammers, and then to be able to start to then store that data into DynamoDB. I would think that part then that should probably be a step function. Right.
Okay,
So the event
so
would trigger step function that would then coordinate all the steps in that process to analyze that image, get the data back from it, store that data into a database, and then also to return the data back to the client if needed.
all right, so if I understand that correctly, we the image would be put into S3.
Hmm.
If we want this to be real time, that would trigger an event. That event then is what triggers a step function that says take this image and pass it to a Lambda function that calls the SageMaker analysis, gets the output of the
Hmm.
SageMaker, which let's say it's JSON or something crazy like that, right? Like some type of here's the description of this image, and then that we just it would be the step function. We could just throw that in DynamoDB or something like that,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
Okay. What if along with this, so I'm also, like we've got time of day, we've got some other data that's just more textual data, and we need to enrich that as well. We need to be like, hey, the geolocation when this was taken, we
Hmm.
you know we have geolocation, but we want to find city state. We want to locate the address off the geolocation. I have Latin Launch. I have another service that will then give me rough proximity, demographic data, whatever. So I want to enrich this photo with that more demographic data. So along with it, I have the image file. I also have what is JSON structure. Does a step function then take that and execute some type of API call to find, to say, here's the Latin launch, give me the demographic data, and I will attach it, and
Okay.
then I'll,
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying? Like, because the
Hmm.
image data is going
Yeah.
to end up in a database with some ID, and I have this other JSONs that I wanna enrich
Yeah.
with that
Well,
demographic data.
and I think a step function, maybe you're just making it sound more grandiose than it is. All step function is just state management. Right.
Okay,
So you have all these different states, and these states then have events, or these states could then trigger other functions themselves. But all the step function does allows you to coordinate that. So if you have different, like what you're describing are different steps of the process that you're thinking about, and each one of these steps have its own correlating function that has to run in order to process the data and get the data back. Right. All the step function is great at basically managing that process. So if that, let's say if one of those steps was say go getting that from that geolocation data, go getting some demographic information about that, if that takes 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or however long it's going to take, a step function can wait for that to happen. It could be checking to see is the data coming back is within a specific period of time. Once it does, then then handle that situation. If it doesn't come back, something else needs to run, like it needs to kind of re-send out that request again. It can then manage that process.
gotcha. So it's just okay. What? How do we trigger that with just random? You think just throw that in another file in an S3 bucket? Be like, here's the like to trigger that step
Yeah,
function.
you could just trigger that. Yeah, with an event. Yep, that's
We
all you
just
would
say
do.
like, oh, we just stored it. We just stored it
Mhm.
in
You
this.
just need an event, right? So where that event comes from, that could almost come from anywhere. Like I said, an event. Most often, the way I work with step functions is mostly by triggering with event bridge, right? So most of the step functions I work with are scheduled, right? So if you want to run the step function, twice a day or every hour, every 2 hours, then just set up an event bridge with an event bus, and that could just set up basically just like a cron job, managed cron job, and
Yeah.
then that each of those events then are basically connected to a step function that you can then just run, or a lambda
And,
function that triggers a step function.
and then, like you said, better to put it probably in S3 than anywhere else because you don't want to lose it if like
Yeah,
my idea of
absolutely.
doing
Oh,
a SQS is like it
yeah.
goes away and you never find it again.
Yeah, which is interesting too. Yeah, because I've seen that situation where, like, if you are, building out a data lake, you really want to have redundant layers of your
Oh
data
yeah.
because the worst case, if you ever lose the data, you could always go back and reload it in from a different layer of of the data lake. Yeah, so get that data landed. You need it landed, Tim.
Well, we're back.
Because I have seen data. Once the data's in the air, floating in the cloud, Tim. Well, if it's landed, it's still in the cloud. But if it's like floating in the ether, like around the cloud, you don't know where it could go away, and you'll be able to find it again.
I will cut it there. Could you hear the? Could you hear the?
No, I can't. I
bumper?
can't hear the audio. No, I did hear the audio in the beginning.
What? You didn't hear the audio in the beginning?
Yeah, well, you started talking. I didn't want to interrupt your flow in the beginning. So, but yeah, I did not hear the bumper at the beginning. So that's why I had no idea.
What
You
in
just
the
started
world?
talking. So
Yeah. Here. Okay. Let's try this again. Let's just see if I can figure out what's going on here. You don't hear that?
No, do not. Oh, very, very low. It's very low and
Okay.
almost.
So the issue here
It's
is
very fuzzy.
Yeah. It's like, oh boy, we're gonna have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Wait, why is that? Any better?
It's like it's very soft,
Okay.
and it's almost like fuzzy, like something
Yeah.
staticky.
It's like it's
Something's-
overdriven before it got to the
yes,
source. All right, we'll have to
something's
figure
an
that
issue.
out. Oh well, there you go. We'll see what we can do. I wasn't able to signal. So that'll cut fine though. So.